Hey guys, welcome back to Revolution. This is part two of examining Matthew Everhard, his video on the critical text versus the Textus Receptus. Sorry it cut out with that first video. Hopefully this can just be a two-part thing. But let's just let Matthew continue. So I just rewound it a tiny little bit, but let's just let him continue.
The ages, and I prefer that. So secondly, this debate, in my mind, could really be reduced quite simply to a discussion on whether antiquity or majority is more important in your evaluation of any given reading. So here's what I mean by that. The critical text largely depends, and I think if we're honest, it largely depends and goes back to text of a more ancient nature and origin than does the Textus Receptus. Now that may be debatable, but
it is debatable. This is one of the things where I've got books here by, well, I've got a book here by Harry Sturz. He talks about the Byzantine readings in the papyri. And so when we understand the Textus Receptus isn't just a Greek thing, okay? So I understand the Greek thing is very important, but the Textus Receptus has the three closed class of witnesses. It has the Greek, it has the Latin, and it has the early church writings. And so if we see the early church writing about, say, the woman caught in adultery or writing about the last 12 verses of Mark, we know that they had that before then, because when they're talking about that, when they're saying that it's scripture, when they're treating it like any other verse or whatever, we can clearly see that they were quoting that. We can see the Comia being quoted by Cyprian. We can see it being quoted by many people, many church writers throughout the ages. And so I think the whole thing is it's not just about the majority text. The majority text exists, and basically, the Byzantine is usually majority text, sort of thing. But the majority text does exist, but that's not the reason why people just choose to have that. There were people like, say, Dean John William Berg, Scrivener, Hoskia, Miller. These guys started the traditional text movement, which eventually has become the modern day majority text type of movement. Now, the King James, underlying King James text, the Textus Receptus, was called the majority text because it was the majority. It's just, okay, this is the majority text. Textus Receptus is based upon the majority of readings, so it's the majority text. Now, since the 1980s, they've had these other Greek texts called the majority text. And people they've confused themselves. The Textus Receptus isn't just like, we don't just count heads. That's what the majority text guys do. We have an eclectic text. Our text is based upon the closed class of witnesses. So we base our text on the Greek, but we also see, like, say, with the Common Johanneum, it's based on 95% of the Latin manuscripts have the Common Johanneum in it, but it's mostly the argumentation for keeping the Common Johanneum all the way from Erasmus through to today is the grammatical issues, and so there is a solecism there if you don't have the comma in there. That solecism doesn't exist if you have the Common Johanneum in the text. The Greek flows perfectly. It doesn't flow perfectly if you have what the Greek text, what the critical text has today. It's a solecism. And so these are things that have to be taken into consideration. And many times people are only looking at, 5 manuscripts from before the 8th century, in the Greek, where they should be looking, if it's flimsy evidence in the Greek, they should be looking at early church writings. They should be looking at the Latin, and probably outside the closed class of witnesses, looking at versions and things like that to get a good grounding of a text. What I find is these guys are basically they've just got Vaticanus and Sinaiticus All this other stuff at the bottom of the page is just fluff. They don't really go there. If it agrees with their findings, then they say, "I see," it's like, but then they'll disagree with it the next time. It's like, you look at these Old Testament scholars and they'll go with the Dead Sea Scrolls in one verse, but then they'll disagree with it the next, and then the next one they go with it, the next one, who's to say which one you're going to go with and which one you aren't going to go with? And the thing is, the whole thing about the majority text, where did that come from? Where did the Byzantine text actually come from? So this is one of the things where, that they can't successfully answer this, where Westcott and Hort, they were like, oh, Lucianic recension sort of thing. There's been a tampering with the text, and the Byzantine text has just become popular. The Byzantine text just all of a sudden appeared everywhere, all of a sudden, without any real upheaval in the church. Now, if it was the critical text that was the main text in the early church, and then all of a sudden this Byzantine text is taken over, surely there would be some knowledge of that, or someone say, hey, the texts have been taken over and, this is happening. But no, they were talking about things like Marcion and the Marcion text and that influencing. But at the end of the day, they can't explain how everywhere just all of a sudden became Byzantine around the time of Chrysostom. That they actually say, oh, it must have been Chrysostom himself. How does he have that type of reach all over the world? Anyway, let's let Matthew continue.
Certainly, we have discovered manuscripts and papyri that simply were not known at the time of the collation of what is the Textus Receptus. We now have older things than they had in the 1500s. And so the critical text, if it has to choose between antiquity and majority readings, it seems to prefer antiquity.
But the thing is, just as a rule, okay, we're going to prefer what's old. Okay, so what if you're finding something that's a Marcion type reading? Where does this end? Like even James White, when he was debating Jeff Riddle, he said that, firstly, he said that the last 12 verses of Mark were Gnostic, probably written by Gnostics. It's like, okay, so you've got that in many of the modern Bibles. So it's a Gnostic reading in the Bible. So imagine you're there talking to a Muslim. He's like, oh, I'll show you the Gnostic readings in your text. And he flips to him and shows you. It's like, and James White, Jeff Riddle said, so if they found like your Sinaiticus type of thing or a Vaticanus type of thing, would you, and that proved that this verse should be in there, would you change your mind? He said, oh yeah, I've changed my mind. And so he would change his mind like that, but based on something that's old. And the thing is, I just don't trust that these guys can date as accurately as they claim. When you look at archaic Mark, if you don't know about it, Google it. Archaic Mark was one of the favorite texts of the Metzgers, and so, of the Aylands, Kurt and Barbara Ayland. And so they, many times, if you read their books, that they're talking about this manuscript, it was basically a manuscript that they said had Vaticanus readings, and it was a Byzantine manuscript. And so it was proven to be a fake. They found Prussian blue ink in it, so it proved that it was only 100 years old or something. And at the end of the day, it's a forgery. And so these guys have been wrong right up until that was like in 2010. How have they tested all these manuscripts like that? There were so many fakes going around. And you look at the dating of evolution. You look at the dating of things to do with other sciences that are just accepted. And if you don't accept that, it's been an ascendancy of a scientific dictatorship in most sciences to do with evolution and things like that. And people just accept it. They swallow it. They say, oh, well, science has said that, so we just accept it. And so you don't really find critical text people being critical of things that agree with their text, that they're just critical of a TR, critical of anything else, but it's like, we're sort of in consensus here, but it's like, even, Stephen Avery and many other people are talking about, Sinaiticus probably being a fake, and instead of people going, okay, let's prove that it's not a fact. It's just like, no, no, no. And like, I understand some of the argumentation that people have brought across. It mightn't be the best, but I mean, when anything is deemed as that could be a forgery, whether it's a statue or a painting or whatever, there's scientific methods that you can use to prove its authenticity. And so they could test these manuscripts. They could test the inks. They could do all sorts of things to these manuscripts to see exactly how old it is, but they won't do it because it's like, oh, we've already accepted that it's around that age. Why let the why get these pesky facts all correct? Let's just leave some things grey, and you're hurting the manuscript. It's like as if there's not, it's these things are massive volumes, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. I think both of them should be tested, and whichever way the science falls, it's like, okay, well, it falls this way or falls that way. But see, most of the paleography is just looking at the way the letters are shaped and going, well, it's about this size, it's on this material, it must be this old. And we see that with archaic mark. We see the errors that people have made over the years with many forgeries. I mean, there's look up manuscript forgeries, Byzantine manuscript forgeries. There's so many of them, and so it's like forging art. It's some people, they don't see this as Christian, non-Christian, whatever. The critical text, Textus Receptus, they don't care. They're just copying Byzantine texts and they're making them look like they're genuine. They're copying old papyrus and making them look genuine, and they're fakes. And so we've got to be careful that we aren't just being gullible and sucked in by um, just by people wanting things to be the way that they wish it would be, instead of actually looking at the science. So at the end of the day, Matthew is looking at a text, a critical text, which is primarily based upon Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And so for me to put so much weight on these manuscripts, I would want them tested. I would look at these manuscripts. I would think about it. If I was resting the words of my eternal salvation on these manuscripts, I would be studying them, looking at them, thinking about them. I would go to the nth degree to sort of solidify my faith in them. But the more you look at Vaticanus and Sinaiticus and you see how much they differ from each other, it's like, how did these two totally different texts get around the same age, and then they're put into the same family, they're amalgamated together, and now we've got this never seen before Westcott and Hort based Greek text that's sort of morphed into this. It's got a few other names, it's got a different haircut, but it's like it's the same thing basically, but it's this Frankenstein type of thing. It's just this half scripture, half, it's got Gnostic readings in it, it's got all sorts of bizarre things. It's got Jesus going to the wrong location. It's got the wrong genealogy. It's got all sorts of bizarre readings in it. And so I would just be thinking twice about basing my whole Christianity, my doctrines, everything upon these two.
Whereas, if you're a Textus Receptus advocate, your main argument must be and is an argument based on majority readings. Now, I personally, and this is where I really struggled with this.
It's not. I think you've heard wrong. What you've probably done is gone into the majority text crowd, and you've maybe read Pickering or Robinson or a bunch of other guys, and you've sort of thought that the King James, TR type of manuscript evidence is very similar. Now, we look at these people and we say, yeah, kudos to them. Majority text most of the time is just backing up our readings. It's like, cool, that's fine. But most of the time we're looking at things like internal consistency, like, say, for example, when Sinaiticus has the wrong location, or I can't remember if it was Sinaiticus or Vaticanus, but one of them has Galilee. The other one didn't. It had I think it was Judea, and so that they changed it, and it was it matches the TR, it matches the correct reading. But then later on, both of them have like Galilee or something like that, and it's like they're not there. The whole narrative is not there. It's in Capernaum. They're in the wrong place, But they have to go with it because these are the oldest, and so they actually allow for these massive errors and mistakes and things like that to be in the text because that's just the way the science falls, sort of thing. And it's like, but the whole majority text thing, the King James position isn't based upon a majority text thing. It just so happens to be the majority text. It was the only text. The Textus Receptus was the only text for hundreds of years, through the whole Reformation period, through the whole period of time from printing. Even the Latin Catholic Bible is basically a TR edition because even the Vulgate doesn't deviate that much as the modern day Unitarian Frankenstein type of text, critical text does.
I didn't have a dog in the fight. I didn't have a horse in the race, so to speak. I have only an intellectual curiosity and what I think is a pious desire to know the Lord through His Word. I had a hard time weighing that out. I mean, on one hand, if you've got 100 texts that say one reading, but you have a much older text that has a slight variance, well, which do you weigh as being more important, the majority or that which comes from antiquity, which is old?
But as I said before about the majority, I think you get my point. I mean, the Textus Receptus does have minority readings in it, the Common Johannium. So, to say we just go with the majority, it's like, no, we don't. it's a misrepresentation of what TR only or King James only, whatever you want to label it, is. At the end of the day, we go with the majority at times because that's all there is. All there is a majority. And so everything points in a certain direction. When everything points in a certain direction and there's sort of like one anomaly, usually you're like, well, there has to be a really good reason for it. Okay. So that's like Revelation 16:5. People are like, well, it's amazing. The critical text guys are going, majority. Revelation 16:5. It says holy. We're going with the majority. So all of a sudden they become majority text people. But then when it comes to the last 12 verses of Mark, they're like, well, I know there's only really two manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, that don't have it. And the thing is, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have the room for that to be penned in. It's just because it's not written in the text doesn't mean you should delete it. It's like, oh gosh. But when you look at that, so throughout Christianity, for probably 1,900 years, everyone's believed that the last 12 verses of Mark should be in there. Vaticanus has been rejected by Erasmus. Even John Mill, 1707, he said he believed it was a back translation from the Latin. He believed it was a Latinized text. So we're looking at this, this text that's sort of like being with Christians, with, probably 99.9% of all Christians who have ever read the whole Bible through or read the New Testament, they've read those words. And so, but then it's like in the last days, it's like they just grab this and just throw it in the bin. And there's got to be something. There's got to be something of more substance to do that, than just there's Vaticanus and Sinaiticus with some blank lines there. Because I know with, I've collated some of Syriac with Sinaiticus, and sometimes there's this whole verses missing, and it's just the guy writing it was sloppy, because you're going through the text, you're looking at other manuscripts, and you're going, he just jumped from that part to that part. That's parablepsis. That's homoioteiton. he did it again. Look, he's done it. 3 verses later, he's done it. He's rushing through, or he's had a break and he's gotten fresh, and this is where I left off, and he's making lots of mistakes, and these manuscripts are filled with mistakes. And so, to just trust Vaticanus and Sinaiticus like that, I mean, to me, it's just amazing. So let's just continue.
Older. A lot of ways, that is the question. That is the state of the art of the question of this entire discussion. Now, one thing that is interesting, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute. The UBS is a great text as far as I'm concerned, but I love what the Cambridge Tyndale House Greek New Testament has done, and that they have basically kind of limited the scope of the manuscripts that they're interested in to the first 500 years of Christian history. If a reading can't be found in the first 500 years, then it's really not considered.
So this is amazing to me. Like, we know that papyrus only lasts a certain amount of time. Now, in certain geographical areas, it's like, okay, well, obviously in Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt, Oxyrhynchus, they find things that are in the desert sands, it's dry, and they find these things. And so, but that discounts everything everywhere else, in a sense where you mightn't have that first 500 years, but you've got the next 500 years, after 500 years, and it's a whole bunch of readings, and you can clearly see traces of that going back to the original. But they just don't have those actual writings, and so they're just going by the weather. They're going by the weather being dry in a certain area. That's how they're going to base their text. And the thing is, it's so fragmentary. They don't know where these scraps of Bible came from. They could actually be people writing against the Bible. It could be a tract, a little booklet saying, they believe this, and it's got a whole bunch of writing. And the only bit that survived was this little square, credit card size thing that has a bit of scripture on it. And it's like, who knows who wrote that? Maybe it was someone who was just like Bart Ehrman. Right? Maybe someone was popular back then writing books. We know that Marcion existed. We know that people like this existed who were making fakes. We know by the amount of apocryphal books that and Gnostic books that people were making money off it or getting their kicks out of having these stories or whatever. So people were doing all sorts of things. And so to just go, I've found a scrap over here, we're going to change the Bible because of this scrap. It's like, and so I think Tyndale House limiting their text, I think, is the worst thing that they can do, because even critical text guys are saying that sometimes there are readings that are older readings, but they're better than the earlier readings. And the thing is, too, things have to make sense. They have to be logical, and they have to be biblical. You can't have, God just all of a sudden being a psycho liar and doing something he wouldn't usually do. But the thing is, with these other texts, you could sort of find anything. You could find something that's really weird and really strange and just try and squeeze it in the text. Like, the only begotten God of John chapter 1, verse 18. The only begotten God, that's Gnostic heresy. This was a huge debate back in the day. Origen was talking about this. It's not just something that, King James TR people have just thought about. This was a real issue. I know James White's like, I heard someone say it was a Gnostic reading. That's stupid. Okay, well, you haven't read Origen. Go back and read these early church writings, and you can see where they're contesting against people for saying that he was an only begotten God, and all this sort of stuff. So we've just had Vladimir Pandowski. He's just written in. Hey, Vladimir, how you doing? He's written, but Nick, if it has wrong, unreliable, and uncertain readings, that means it's likely authentic. And if you found it in the Gnostic trash piles in Egypt, or the Pope's cupboard, even better. It's scholarship, mate. Yes, and that's so true. This is one of the things where what I'm finding more and more with critical text guys, and I'm not saying Matthew here. He's obviously, weighing things up and coming up to conclusions and things like that. But I find hardcore critical text guys, they don't mind saying that there's mistakes in the originals. That they think Matthew made mistakes, Mark made mistake, Luke, John. That these guys were just making blunders all over the place. I mean, they were just dumb, illiterate fishermen and all this sort of stuff. And so, this type of thing has become quite popular with Bart Ehrman, but it's not just him. He is one of the main players in the academy. And what amazes me is these critical text guys are like, we're against Bart Ehrman, but they have to sort of sneak around with the academy with these type of heretics to climb up the ladder. You know what I mean? Nearly every book has, every Brill book has Bart Ehrman at the front. It's like, why don't you separate completely from this guy and just say he's a heretic? Let's formulate our own group. And this is where Tyndale House, they've tried to separate themselves even from Westcott and Hort by going back to Tregelles. And I'm learning a fair bit about Tregelles too. I'm looking at him and Delitzsch and what they've done, with dethroning the Textus Receptus before that it even became an issue and all this sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like they're embarrassed. It's like we're part of this academy and we have to be there with Bart Ehrman and Jennifer Knust and all these other heretics, and it's like let's avoid all that. Let's just go back and let's go back to Tregelles and let's go back before Westcott and Hort even, because I think they know deep down Westcott and Hort were just like toxic. They were toxic people. They had Unitarians working with them. I mean, they were deeply, deeply compromised people. If you've got Jehovah's Witnesses helping you with your Bible, I mean, you've got problems, and they call us the cultists, we're the cultists, But I think they're realizing, we just have to point out, hey, these guys are heretics, all the rest of it. And it's so obvious. And so they're trying to avoid all this. So they're recreating the narrative. And that's why, Gurry and Hickson, they're like, we're evangelical too. We love the Lord and all this sort of stuff. And anyway, let's let Matthew continue, because I don't want to divert too much from what he's saying, because sometimes I could be putting things into his mouth, which is actually something that Hickson or Gurry has said, or someone else, and he actually hasn't said this. So let's just let him explain why he's a critical text guy.
They do stretch the boundaries a little bit for the Book of Revelation due to the lesser number of manuscripts and papyri and other fragments that they have of Revelation. I think they go out to as much as the first 800 years of Christianity. But given that so many of the Byzantine texts are later than that, they're newer than that, the weight of the Tyndale House Greek New Testament really does stress antiquity. And this brings me to a theoretical new Greek manuscript text, what I would love to have. If somebody could set the boundary to try to balance between antiquity and majority in such a way that you said, okay, let's make this a majority text. Let's make a majority text reading. However, we're going to set parameters for that, and we're going to limit the parameters to the first 800 years. Then that'd be my text. I think that'd be a fantastic way to do it. I don't know that that's exclusively what the Tyndale House Greek New Testament has done, but I do like the principle of setting some kind of parameters, because the further you get out.
But the thing is, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, they differ so much. Then you need gurus to tell you which one is the correct one, because one verse will go one way, one verse will go the next, the other way, and it's all over the place. And so, the first 800 years, we'll just go with the majority or whatever. But at the end of the day, the critical text guys, they just go with Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. And so everything else is basically, I know you have a few aberrations here and there, but everything else is basically TR majority text type of stuff. Because when you have a mindset that the true text is the traditional text, or the Textus Receptus type text, and everything else other than that is just an aberration. When you look at Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, they're just aberrations that have gone further and further away, and they've gone further and further away from each other too. They're these two different animals, and you're trying to mate them and formulate this Westcott and Hort text. It's just it's a mess. Um, and the first 800 years, the majority text there, if you just took the Latin into consideration there, you would probably come up with something that's very close to the TR. I think if you went for the first 800 years. And the thing is, like I said earlier, who's dating these? Why is it like, okay, Vaticanus is, that's 400 and this other, Sinaiticus is 400, but then they're like, 350, and then they'll even have like 340 and 360, for one or the other, whichever one they want to favor. And then they have, Codex D, or that one, that's 5th century, I mean, how do they know this definitively? I just think that there's so much more science that could be utilized here. Like, I mean, they can examine nowadays with certain dating methods. They can examine what type of manuscripts it was on. They can do certain testing to see, exactly what type of animal it was, what type of area these animals came from, exactly what type of inks were used. And so I think all this type of methodology needs to be utilized. We're still going on what scholars thought back in 1860. It's yeah, that looks old. We better date it as this, and so we're just still going with that because it just suits a narrative, and it topples the TR.
Out in terms of chronology from the writings of the apostles, you do have to kind of weigh, well, if I have 500 editions, but they're all 1,500 years old or 1,300 years old or whatever, then how much does that truly weigh? So you have to weigh that question out for yourself. I've been thinking about this, and I lean towards antiquity as being more valuable in considering a reading than majority. You could disagree with that, and you'll have your own conclusions, but that's what I came up with. The next item for me is, I think it's very, very important that we resist the temptation of what I will call English priority. And here's what I mean by that. If you are choosing your Greek New Testament text based on your preference for an English translation, then I think I would suggest you're doing that exactly backwards. I think we should select our English translation based on our preference of the Greek New Testament text, not the other way around.
Okay, so yeah, sounds like a really good point that he's bringing up, but I just want to say that, see, a lot of people fail to realize that the King James did two things. It's a translation, but it's also a final edition of the TR. And so the words, I've often said this, had they done a parallel Greek text next to it, there would be no King James only movement. There'd be no TR only movement. It would just be, King James, that type of era. It would be both. And so, Scrivener recognized that the TR underlying the King James is the definitive TR. He didn't just go to Beza. He went to Beza, but he amended it according to what the choices of the King James translators were. So I think by sort of, sometimes what people can do is they can downplay certain things like English and think that anything in English is just a crass language. It's just, and I understand English is a bit of a cross mixture of, French and German and, Latin and Greek and all sorts. It's a mishmash of everything, We've got all sorts of influences into English. So there's nothing that special about it, okay? But it has become the dominant world language. and it also has a history about it that's tied to 60 of the greatest scholars who have ever compiled a Bible translation. So these guys got together with the knowledge that they had of Greek and Hebrew and many different languages, people like Lancelot Andrews, people like John Boyce, brilliant guys. And so these guys have gotten together and they've formulated the Bible in English, and they didn't produce, a corresponding Greek or Hebrew text or whatever. They just put it in English. That's what they were commissioned to do. And so sometimes, it's like Jesus said, a prophet is not welcome in his own country. He went preaching in his hometown, and they tried to throw him off a cliff. They're like, who's this guy? Sometimes we can treat English like that. It's like, what? English scholars got it right? I mean, fair enough if it was done in Athens, or it was done in Constantinople, or if it was done here and there, and we sort of agree mostly with that, with the Byzantine influence. But when it's the definitive text, the which to Yah, it was compiled. But the thing is, it's not just a bunch of Englishmen. There were French people involved. There were other Spaniards. There were other people involved too. And this is primarily 99.999, like James White says, 99.9999% of the text of Beza is the King James. So it's actually based upon his work, a Genevan guy. And so most of his work is based upon Stephanus. Most of his work is based upon Erasmus and a few other guys. And so you've got all sorts of influences there. And what you're going to understand is from the time of the fall of Constantinople, the Greeks dispersed all throughout Europe, bringing their language, bringing their culture, bringing their manuscripts with them. And so I see that as the providence of God. God brought this into the face of people like Erasmus, and he learnt these languages, and people like Aldous, they were printing these things, and people like Stephanus and Theodore Beza, they were able to learn these things fluently and understand them. And so, I think I've sort of rabbit trailed a fair bit here, but I've got a few more comments from Vladimir. He said, just like in evolution, they find a genetically diseased individual with anatomic aberrations and call it transitory species. Often they combine unknown bones and fabricate from their imagination 100%. And that's exactly true. It's like if you look at the cover of National Geographic magazine, you'll see this, Neanderthal or whatever they call them. And they've found a bone or a leg, or they got Lucy there and they've got a leg bone, and they've got a bit of a jaw over here, and and that's science, And so this is the thing, we think that no, that would never creep into Christianity, that would never be part of the academy. Christians are people of morals, and we follow the Bible. It's like no, this type of science, this type of quackery, this type of strange, bizarre pseudosciences, that they enter into Christianity and they become mainstream, unfortunately. And so that's what we're seeing in this generation. So Vladimir says, meanwhile, they ignore the majority of millions of normal species that provide a complete picture because it debunks their theory. And that's exactly right. If you just look at the normal evidence, you will find normal things. You will find creation. You will find no evolution. But if you look at textual criticism, if you just go with and the thing is, I reject the majority. It's like, well, what are you accepting? A minority of two manuscripts overriding everything else, commentaries, translation, everything else, absolutely everything. And it's like, okay, I reject the majority text. It's like, man, I mean, you don't have to go that route. I would just say to Matthew at this stage, like, if he does watch this video, he might, I would say, look, I don't hate you. I just sort of feel sorry for you that you haven't had good information. I would suggest that you get some really good TR information. I suggest that you spend a few more years weighing this up, because becoming a critical text guy means that you believe basically in what Metzger says, that Matthew made mistakes in the originals, that there's mistakes in your Bible. I'm not just saying this from a TR perspective. I'm repeating what Gurry and Hickson and these other guys say. Oh, all the Bibles have mistakes. Our Bibles has mistakes, but that's as long as you love Jesus. As long as you have God forgiving your sins and you're very charitable to everyone, that's all you need. Sort of thing. It's like there's a deception, and you just got to be careful, because this deception is very powerful. You've got to understand that the TR position is rejected by the Roman Catholics. Roman Catholics have accepted the critical text because of people like Carlo Martini and others who worked on the text that you're saying you follow now. The Jehovah's Witnesses, they love that text because it's harder to find the Trinity. You got Trinitarians nowadays with a critical text, and they're like, how do we squeeze the Trinity back in? They're desperately in translation trying to, it's like, oh, we can squeeze that in Romans, and we can make Jesus God there. It's like, just follow the TR. Jesus is God everywhere. God was manifest in the flesh. That's deleted. He appeared in a body. Anyway, let's let Matthew continue.
Now that may bear some consideration for those of you who are in the King James onlyist camp, because I think, and I could be wrong here, but I suspect that a lot of the arguments in defense of the TR only position is really only sort of a cover for a defense of King James only advocacy. And if that's true, and only you would know that in your heart, then I think that is backwards. If you love the new King James.
And so, I know when I was listening to Jeff Riddle, he said, I guess in a way, like people who get labeled King James only, it's a horrible thing, because it's like being labeled a racist. Okay, oh, you're a racist. You're a Ku Klux Klan guy. Okay, so you don't like black children, or and it's like, it's such a horrible thing to be labeled something that you're not. Oh, you're a womanizer, are you? Okay. Oh, you're pro-life, so you hate women. Okay, so how long have you hated women? Why do you hate women? It's like, I don't hate women. And this is the thing. It's like King James only. See, the thing is, a lot of these guys only will put it into certain categories of like the radical, Gip, Ruckman, Ripplinger type of thing. And that's usually what they'll use it. So they use it in different ways in different conversations. So if some people say, oh yeah, King James only, and they talk about it like it's, there's a scholarly King James only movement. Other people like King James only is just a cult. It's sort of like Westboro Baptist sort of thing. Tex Mars and Gal Ripplinger are just sitting on your shoulder and you just parroting on. But the thing is, then James White will come along and say, oh, the TR movement is just King James onlyism. It's exactly the same. And so it's like, you're just going to be labeled in a cult anyway. And the other day I was listening to Stephen Boyce, and he said, he was talking about people who are TR only people, or even the more radical King James only types. So he sort of put TR only. You're already, on the edge of like, you're a loser, man. You're a flat earther. But it's like even the more radical King James, you're way, way over there, And so it's like, if you just have a TR position, you're on a slippery slope to onlyism, to cultism, to you and Gal Ripplinger are going to be high-fiving, and you're going to be talking about, blue-blooded aliens like Ruckman did and all sorts of things. And so it just comes down to someone's definition of what King James only is. Because James White says that Zane Hodges is a King James onlyist. He's a majority text guy. But there's 5 different categories of King James only. And so that's the thing, which category? The hyper King James so it's just everyone's in a cult. We're all in a cult, but it's just different variations of being in a cult. Pretty much we're not critical text guys, so we're wrong. It's like not believing in evolution. Well, you're just an idiot, that sort of thing. It's like it just varies on how much of an idiot we really are. That's sort of like King James only. You're a hyper King James only. You're a real idiot, So it's quite amazing.
The NKJV, and you think the TR is right because ultimately you want to defend the New King James, then I think that's backwards. But the argument works both ways, because if you love the NIV or the NASB or the ESV or the LSB or many of the other newer English translations, and you're going to choose the critical text only because you love the ESV, then that too is backwards. And so I've had to ask myself that very question. Do I love the critical text because I'm an ESV guy?
Well, the ESV did have the reading in Jude 5 before it came out in the Greek. But just to sort of sum up this whole issue, like I said before, there's 2 issues here. The King James is the final edition of the TR. So regardless of whether it's readable or not readable or whatever, that's like, it's always going to be that. It's always going to be put there as like, that's the final edition of the TR. And people like, okay, Scrivener, he attempted to make that underlying Greek text that the King James translators, didn't produce in 1611. And so he's done it 250 years later. So they just go with that. They're like, okay, that'll do. And, we're talking about microscopic little differences that, me and a few other TR people, chat about. But on a whole, it's pretty much the text underlying the King James. And so they're pretty much the same thing. And so that's the first issue with the King James, is that it is a TR. So that's why we're like, the King James all the time, because it's a TR edition. Then you got the translation of it. So they've formulated their own text, then they've translated it, and we believe that they've done that good as well. They've faithfully done that, to the point where it's like, man, if you were living back in those days, that would be absolutely 100% what would speak to you. I'm not one of those who say that you can't update the words. You can't update certain things in the Bible because, language is fluid. We can't control it. Words, we know words like, say, get the word gay, it means something different today than it did 50 years ago. And so we understand that words change. And so to update a few words here and there isn't changing the words, it's actually just bringing it into the usage of today. And sometimes, syntax can change and grammatical rules can change as well. But at the end of the day, there is a standard, and it is the King James. And so if I was Italian and I understood what I understand today, I would align my Bible version with the King James. And so, because basically, I don't know many people who speak fluent Greek. I don't know that many people who are fluent in both Greek and English. But if you get the Textus Receptus and you get the King James side by side, they equal each other. And so people are like, oh, you're translating from the King James, that's crazy. And it's like, okay, so someone has to learn Greek fluently. Someone who already knows English, they might, like say at the moment we're going through the Urdu Bible. And so the translator, he knows English and Punjabi. And he knows English fluently, Punjabi, and he knows Urdu fluently. And so I can just go through the King James reading it in English, and he can go through the Urdu. He can match up those words, and what would what if he spoke fluent Greek? That would be amazing. Now I can get him to the point where he can understand what the Greek is saying, but most of the time it's exactly what the English is saying anyway. So when people are saying, "Oh, they're translating from the King James," I'm like, "Yeah, well," and that's one of the main reasons why I created the 2016 edition, because in the creation of Textus Receptus Bibles, what we want is people to be able to go through, translate it, because many people speak English as a second language. If you go to the Philippines, they're all speaking English. If you go to India, they're speaking English. If you go to Papua New Guinea, they're speaking English. And so very few of the scholar, and I've met leading pastors and theologians and all sorts of people. Very few of them would ever know how to even pass Greek, let alone speak a language like this fluently and know English at the same time. And so it takes a certain amount of dedication to get to that point. But we want Bibles in these languages. And so to have an updated English edition, which they can read without, getting caught in some of the archaisms and obsolete wordings and things like that, if we can get them to translate from that, then it's fast tracking everything. And then later on over the years going through those issues. Anyway, this is a complete side issue. I'm going to let Matthew continue.
Or should I love the ESV because I'm a critical text guy? So either way, I think if we're working from English to the Greek, we're probably doing it backwards. And I had to do a soul search to make sure I wasn't defending a preferred Greek text based on a preferred English translation. And I think it would be fair for all of us to ask ourselves that same question. Next,
Greek is just a language, okay? Sometimes there are words that God has put in history through Latin, and they've dropped out of Greek things, and they've ended up back in the Latin, and they've ended up back in the Greek, and I think the whole thing of can anything good come out of Nazareth sort of thing. It's like, can anything good come out of the English language? I mean, yes, there can. There's been many Bibles that have been translated just from the English. Most of the Bible work has been done by English-speaking people. The British Bible Society. The Bible Society was basically an English thing, and then it became the British and Foreign Bible Society, and then it became the United Bible Societies. But most of the Bible work has been done in English in the last few hundred years, and so much of that work is actually reflecting what the King James has. And so just like they did with the States Bible, they mostly they went to the Greek and the rest of it, but they were going and they were guided by the King James version.
Next, and this has been helpful for me, I have found the conspiracy theories to be uncompelling. Now, most of the conspiracy theories are not necessarily from the TR only advocate brothers, but more so from the KJV only advocate brothers. And I've looked into several of these conspiracy theories, and I just don't think there's any there, if that makes sense. I don't find them to be rationally persuasive to me. Now, as I say that, let me just say, hey, I'll hear out your conspiracy theory, man. You want to tell me about UFOs? I would love to hear what you've heard about UFOs or seen or whatever. If you've got a rational explanation for the JFK assassination, or if you know something about the moon landing that I don't know, man, I am all ears. I'm down for good conspiracy theory. I'll give you a fair listen. And I gave some of these conspiracy theories a fair listen when it came to the text issues, and I found them to be rationally unpersuasive. So I do not believe, for instance, that the motivation of the critical text is to remove verses from the Greek New Testament.
Okay. So, I mean, it's just really hard to respond to this. I guess the whole thing is there's certain words like conspiracy theory, King James only, this sort of thing. where they all have to be defined. I understand that by saying that someone's a conspiracy theorist, that can sometimes end the argument. It's like you're talking about, say, abortion's a huge topic at the moment. Talking about abortion, it's like, well, there's been a concerted effort by Planned Parenthood to, as to create a genocidal, um, what would you call it? Infanticidal? That's like children, but to destroy children in the womb for African Americans, and people will say, "Oh, that's just a conspiracy," and that's like that ends the story because it's just conspiracy. I mean, the thing is, if you just read history, I mean, nearly absolutely everything is a conspiracy. I mean, just read through World War II, Hitler, Mussolini, Churchill. Read through just the main players and just a cursory look at history, you will see conspiracy after conspiracy after conspiracy. But then, so you have to categorize it. It's like conspiracy theory. And then he's like, okay, so we're talking about moon landing stuff and we're talking about UFOs. And, so I know, I think Ruckman, he sort of believed in the blue-blooded aliens, and he talked a lot about the CIA and things like that. And sometimes rightfully so, people, I mean, the CIA's overthrown our government here in Australia. They just overthrew the Pakistani Prime Minister the other day. And he warned us. He said the CIA are going to overthrow me. And sure enough, they got rid of him, Imran Khan. And so, but the thing is, like, conspiracy is just, it's a common thing. It's so common that when people say, oh, you believe in conspiracy theories, it's like saying, oh, you believe people um, get together and talk. It's like, yeah, it happens every day. It just, I mean, every second news article is a conspiracy. Yes, it's like criminals, they conspire, so it's just a normal thing. But I understand he's talking about the conspiracy theories, where, um, and we've all heard them, like, I think James White deals with some of these with Gail Ripplinger with the acrostic algebra type of thing. Um, what else? Yeah, and I guess there is that whole thing of Antioch good, Alexandria bad, but then when there's Gnostic things that come into play in Antioch, it's like, oh, that ruins the narrative, so we just won't even look at that. All those sorts of things. But usually and like he said, that's usually King James only stuff. It's unpersuasive. He doesn't believe it. Um, but the thing is that if you're a critical text guy, just hear me out. If you're a critical text guy, you have to believe in conspiracies, and so you have to believe in that Westcott and Hort, they produced the correct text under the whole understanding of Eleusinic recension that's been totally debunked. You have to believe that there was a wholesale, I mean, it would be a Genesis to Malachi edition of the Septuagint that Jesus used and the disciples. They all used this. You have to believe in that conspiracy. You have to believe that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and all the writers of the Bible, that they made huge mistakes in their writing of the Bible. Instead of saying Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have mistakes, no, the originals have mistakes. So you have to believe that even though God inspired the words, he inspired the mistakes. And sometimes really dumb things, location errors, the genealogical errors are a blast, because sometimes it's a list of kings, it's like, imagine going through and saying, okay, well, then there was Henry VIII, and then there was, I don't know, some guy called Bill, and then there was some other girl called Jane, I guess, and then Elizabeth, and then King James, and then Charles. It's like just easy stuff that they could easily look up. Just basic stuff. 10 times the genealogy Matthew 1 is listed in the Old Testament, but Matthew got it wrong. This Hebrew guy got it wrong. Usually you have to believe in the conspiracy theory of Markan priority. And you have to believe in the conspiracy theories that the Vatican Representative Carlo Martini was involved with the Nestle Aland text, but he didn't really have Catholic influence on the text, or George Vance Smith, who was a Unitarian who worked with Westcott and Hort. He didn't, influence the text, even though he wrote a book saying that he did, and he wrote a book saying that doctrine was changed in favor of Unitarianism. But apparently, no doctrines are changed. But he's the guy who did it, and so he would know. But we won't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Anyway, I'll let Matthew continue. Actually, Vladimir said, so far Matthew hasn't brought any personal critical thinking to the table, no in-depth research. All of this is neophyte James White fanboy regurgitations, like low tier stuff. Such disappointment. Yeah, it is, in a sense where I guess I've said this quite a lot recently, but I used to think that just by showing critical text guys where there's mistakes in their text, they would go, "Wow, there's mistakes. What?" And they'd throw it out. But that's part of the whole text. They believe the Textus Receptus has mistakes too. Their text has mistakes too, and so do the original. So it's just sort of it's totally changed my way of approaching critical text guys, because I used to be like, how you get this sort of gullible thing where you're like, if I just tell people about Jesus, surely they're going to believe it. And you tell them and they're like, oh yeah, I've heard that before. I think it's a load of rubbish, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, what? You don't believe it? It's, it's this new convert, gullibility where you just think if people are shown the truth, surely they're going to accept it. You forget that, a lot of people out there have different motives. And like I was talking about before, you can have the wrong motives. You can have, you can be trying to please someone, trying to keep a job, all sorts of things. You don't want to be labeled as a TR guy. So, and that's why I think a lot of these guys who are becoming quite popular on the internet talking about the TR, nearly all of them are like, I'm a Byzantine prioritist and I'm a majority text only guy. I'm this guy. Yeah, none of them will just go, yeah, I'm a TR guy. And I noticed that a lot of these guys want to print the TR and all this stuff. It's like, why would you want to do that? Why is there this desire for people to print this text that they don't like and they don't think is accurate and they think is full of flaws? And so anyway, let's let Matthew continue with the conspiracy theory stuff.
I don't believe that is true. If that were to be true, you would have to have some sort of a 2 millennia long cover-up where the modern Bible publishers are working in conspiracy with the Alexandrians of old and throughout the ages to remove certain verses from old ancient manuscripts and papyri. And I just find that incredible.
But the thing is, a lot of modern day heretical things stem from old heresies. I mean, if you look at the infatuation with Enoch and the Michael Heiser type of stuff, you can see that this stuff was popular back in the day, and it's resurged. And so it's not like it's a conspiracy. All it is false information that was back then. It's been rehashed and put out again, and so it's that's not a conspiracy. It's not like people linked from generation to generation, especially when it's to do with literature. I mean, if you've got literature, I mean, even like with the Revelation 16:5 material, you've had the last 200 years of people being wrong on that issue, completely wrong, and even to the point where they're using that as an argumentation to overthrow the TR in the Bible societies, and they're looking at it saying, "Yeah, we're wrong there. Let's not have this wrong reading. Let's go with the critical text." And so they've run with that because of these false arguments. And so we're looking at 200 years. I mean, it's not as if they were, this is a secret society and they're all shaking hands. It was just ignorance. People weren't willing to look at this and think about it and give it time. And And so now that that has been exposed and it's been shown that that is the correct reading, and like I said, I'll debate anyone on the planet about that. Um, at the end of the day, should we equate that it's a conspiracy theory, or just people are gullible and they'll follow dumb things, and even if they're old, even if it's an old thing rehashed, people still follow Gnostic type of things. People follow bizarre, old cults and um, the Essenes and Hinduism and all sorts of bizarre things that are old just because of writings about it. It's not like a conspiracy, it's not like anyone's conspired. I just can't see that this is a good example of a conspiracy, and especially an example of a conspiracy of why you're a critical text person now. It just doesn't make sense to me. Anyway.
To the point of unbelievability. Neither do I find convincing that there is some sort of a moral, there's a deleterious moral nature to the Alexandrian manuscripts, as over against the Byzantine manuscripts. Now, again, for those of you who aren't,
Well, it just depends if you have, doctrines that are, Trinitarian. You believe in the deity of Christ. You've got correct eschatology. You've got correct pneumatology, the doctrine of the Holy Spirit being God. Um, things like that. When you go through the critical text, it's very hard to find these. When you go through the Textus Receptus, when you go through the writings of the reformers, they were like, well, this verse says this and this verse says that, and even to the point where even a lot of the time it was way more nuanced, even with Roman Catholics, because I know there were people, in the Roman Catholic Church who were doubting lots of verses, and the Jesuits are very evil. But at the end of the day, with the Clementine Vulgate, it still had the Comia Hennium in it. It still had the Principe Adulterae in it. It still had the last 12 verses of Mark in it. It's way closer to the TR. It's like, their argumentation was a lot different, and so now we're dealing with we're arguing. It's pretty much like higher criticism. Um, so anyway, let's just continue.
Maybe you're not up on the discussion here. The majority of the New Testament manuscripts that we have today are of a Byzantine nature. They come from the region formerly known as Cappadocia, more modernly known as Turkey, Asia Minor, etc. And they are numerically the majority. However, they are newer in time. They're not as old as some of the Alexandrian manuscripts. And so a lot of the conspiracy theory argument basically says, look, Alexandria, bad place. Those guys were bad. They were evil. They were heretics. Whereas the Cappadocians, whereas the Byzantines, all good. They were saints. They were pure. They had better intentions. They were better scholars. Yeah, I just don't attribute morality to geographic region.
Yeah, but you've got to take into consideration other factors. So I know that most TR people that I know would even say that, say, like the Comia Hennium, one of the reasons where people are saying that this could have dropped out of the Greek is because of poor teachings within the Byzantine Church about, the Trinity, Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, and when you look at where many of these manuscripts have been found in Alexandria, we're looking at Nag Hammadi, which is basically, there's way more Gnostic manuscripts being found than biblical ones, and so you're looking at the Gospel of Thomas and all sorts of things, all mixed in with these other manuscripts, and so even Bruce Metzger, who these guys should revere because he basically has formulated their modern text. He said there was 15 Gnostic groups that have been counted in Alexandria, and so I'm not saying that this location good, this location bad, but I'm just saying, like, if you find, yeah, sure, you might find, say, a piece of bread and it's got a spot of mold on it. It's not a good thing, and that can happen. But it's like if you've got a whole bunch of mold and then a tiny portion of edible bread sitting on top of that, that's not a good. That's a way worse sign. And so I think that's the thing is like, because people go to the extreme and say, oh, everything from Antioch is from God, and everything from Alexandria is, and then people will talk about the Council of Nicaea, and they talk about Athanasius, and and he came from Alexandria. And the thing is, I just listen to that and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I don't, you know, most people, most TR people don't have to go this Alexander. To me, this two stream route is just it's just a distraction. It looks good on a chart, but it just doesn't add up. And so yeah. Anyway,
And so, though many people have made the argument that Alexandria was a bad place, shake your finger at Alexandria.
let's go.
I'm sorry, it just didn't work. It just didn't work as an argument for me. So, for those basic reasons, I have decided, as far as I know my own heart, that I'm going to be a critical text guy. And that doesn't mean that I don't love the.
So you said for those basic reasons. So it's like, man, I mean, seriously, critical text guys, you guys have to believe that Erasmus, he actually had a manuscript of Revelation, and he spotted homoioteiton in chapter 22, verse 19. But then years later, it was discovered that a conspiracy happened, and he lied to everyone, and no one picked this up until Delitzsch and Tregelles. That it was actually from verse 16 that the manuscript, it was missing these verses. So he lied to everyone. They have to think that Erasmus, he promised that if anyone found any manuscript with this reading of 1 John 5:7, he'll put it in there. Um, they have to believe that they were another conspiracy, that they were rushing. Froben was rushing against, against the Complutensian polyglot guys. He was rushing. That there was this fight, to print first and publish and all this sort of stuff. No proof of that. The what else is there? There's so many anecdotes about Erasmus. That's just Erasmus. Then we'll get to the King James guys. I mean, King James was homosexual apparently. He had 8 children. He had a wife. It's like, yeah, surely that would make him, if he was, which he definitely wasn't, it would make him bisexual because he had kids. It's so weird. But then it's like, okay, then he's a pedophile. And they pick on words like, oh, he had his favourites. But then when you got Henry VIII having his favourites, they never accuse him of being gay or anything. But then you got, the King James guys, the Granville Sharp rule, which they knew of because Beza talked about it, and so did Calvin, and they utilised it. But apparently Granville Sharp, he wrote about it, so people are now saying that they weren't alive when Granville Sharp discovered this rule, even though Beza talked about it. And so they didn't know the Greek language as well as people like him. And so how could they translate things properly, and verses about the deity of Christ and all this? And it's like, so there's so many conspiracy theories in the critical text camp about Erasmus, about the King James translators, and so you have to believe all them as well if you really want to be a critical text guy, because I mean, if you believe that Erasmus only had one manuscript for Revelation, he said that he had Greek copies, and he said in his Greek copies he saw homoioteiton in verse 19. So if his manuscript, if the manuscript that I have now of Reuchlin is the actual manuscript of Erasmus, and it stops at verse 16, then Erasmus was a liar. He just lied, and he didn't spot homoioteiton there, even though he argued about this, talked about it and spoke about it. He mentions it in his annotations. And then he's saying he checked other Greek copies. So you had other Greek manuscripts with the readings there. And so he had other access to other Greek, so it wasn't just one Greek manuscript. So you have to believe the conspiracy theory that Erasmus was just like a compulsive liar. You have to believe that. I mean, there's so many things that you have to believe that to be a critical text guy, because these are part and parcel of coming against the TR is having these types of story, these Bart Ehrmanish types of stories where you're getting in the shoes of someone going, oh, Erasmus, yeah, he's probably just lying and believing that. It's conspiracy theories. So Vladimir says, without conspiring, society cannot function. Ask any sociologist. Social groups at any level conspire in their dynamics. He's gaslighting himself with a political narrative, control technique, naive. Yeah, and this is one of the things. I mean, the whole thing of conspiracy theory and all this stuff. I mean, you don't reject something because there's conspiracy around it. I mean, the whole 9/11 thing. You do your own research into that. You don't just go by, oh, I watched Loose Change and I was convinced. Or I watched Zeitgeist and I was convinced. It's like, yeah, watch those things, but be critical of be critical of that. Be critical of the 9/11 Truth Movement. Be critical of people of the 9/11 Commission report. Be critical of everything. Look at it. I mean, the whole thing about critical text. You're looking at something in a critical fashion. And so this is one of the things I find critical text people, they will not look at their own text or their own favorite manuscripts as critical as us TR people would. And so but yeah, about conspiracy, it's like I mean, just look at what's been happening with pharmaceutical companies in the last few years. I mean, I'm just glad that I knew about this type of overreach back in the 1990s when they announced that every 1 in 5 children in Australia have a mental illness, and there were people who came out in mainstream media and said, no, that is just making 1 in 5 children a potential customer for a pharmaceutical company. And I was like, yeah, that's a really good point. I sort of followed it through and then over the years got involved in watching. It was actually a psychiatrist who I was working for. He gave me this really interesting video called Psychiatry and Industry of Death. There's a guy called Thomas Sars. He's a atheist, but he has written really good books about the psychiatric industry. He teamed together with the Center for Human Rights, I think it is, CCHR, which is funded by Scientology. And so, unfortunately, and he hated Scientology, but these were the guys who had the money, so they just gave him a bunch of money to make some videos. So he made a bunch of videos, and they're actually really, really good. If you want to know anything about the psychiatric industry, these guys just plow through it. And I remember when I was reading the book of Dianetics, the Scientology manual, they talk a lot about front lobal lobotomies and things like that, and how dangerous they are, and how they should, And I'm like, okay, well, Scientology got something right, And that's the thing, you can't. A Jehovah's Witness can be right on something. I mean, broken clock is right twice a day. Scientologists can be right about something. I mean, even the more you listen to stories about dictators and Stalin and Hitler and Mussolini, sometimes they say something like, that's brilliant, because they had followers. People liked them for a reason. Not everything they said was just psycho. And so the thing is, I understand that if he's saying, the King James only thing, the conspiracy theory thing, well, look past that. Continue to listen to Jeff Riddle, but look at other people. Look, read books, go through and just study certain parts of Scripture. That's what I find is most compelling to me. someone will say, oh, what about Luke 2:22? And so I'll just start studying through that. And after a while, I just realize if you believe that they all got purified, you don't believe the Bible. It's pretty simple. I mean, if Jesus had to get purified and Joseph had to get purified, that's not what it's talking about in the Old Testament. The Old Testament's talking about the woman getting purified. And so it can't be the reading of their purification. It has to be her purification. And so it's just the way it is. It's like saying, God lied, or imagine, like, on the eighth day the girls got circumcised. It's like, hang on. No, it's the males got circumcised. It's a big deal. So the historical context, just the internal consistency of Scripture. I mean, sometimes all that overrides the whole majority thing, like he was saying. And so anyway, Vladimir is writing lots and lots here. So I'm just going to, oh no, he's just written, children at age 5 to 6 conspire against their parents, must be aliens. Yeah, and that's the thing, like this whole conspiracy theory. I mean, I know people say it came out with a JFK issue, and I mean, from someone, I'm in Australia, I'm not American, but from if I just every now and then I just remind myself, I instead of calling it the USA, I call it the USSA, just sort of like USSR something. And I just think, what would, in like the 1980s, if the Russians came out and said, oh, okay, we've done this or we've done, and they make these propaganda claims, or they do something that's just really full on, or bomb someplace and just blame it on someone else or whatever. You would expect that. You expect the Indonesian government to be ruled by the military and to do things and to jail people and to commit genocide and kill millions of people in West Papua and all sorts of things, and the Malaysian government to do certain things and blame people, do of say they committed blasphemy or committed sodomy or whatever to jail your opposition in that type of country. And I follow Pakistani politics, and it's pretty rough and pretty dirty. Go to Papua New Guinea, the politics there is just full on. But I was telling them when I was there, when I'm street preaching, I'm saying, you guys think that Papua New Guinea is one of the most corrupt nations in the world? You haven't been to Washington, D.C., where they run the Federal Reserve Bank, and they run this and they run that. They run OPEC, they run this and that. And it's like the things that America has done. And so a lot of Americans are blind to what they're actually doing, because they're only looking at their own backyard and they're happy and they're safe and they're living in a free country and all this. They don't realize that their country is like Rome. It's like the Romans, they're happy all in Rome, just enjoying their life, but the soldiers are out there doing full on things, just destroying cultures and mass murders and millions of people dying, and basically from Korea, Iran, Vietnam, all those CIA overthrows. I can just look at Iran. Anyway, I'm rabbit trailing on, but there are so many the whole world is just based upon conspiracy. It's just part of life. And so anyway, let's just move on from that statement.
The Textus Receptus, I realize, of course, that the King James Version is a magnificent English translation, that the Lord did in fact use the King James as well as the Textus Receptus in the Reformation era for great ends and to bring about the revival of his church. However, I also see the Lord working marvelously through the critical text as well.
But see, I don't. Like when I'm street preaching, people come up to me and say, so the Bible says that if someone rapes a girl, she gets pregnant, then she has to marry the rapist. And I'm like, where are you getting this? And so, sure enough, you start reading into this stuff. It's in the NIV, it's in the ESV, but it's not in the King James. And that's a heavy thing. And I've been told that lots, like by just random people on the streets who aren't churched or anything. You've got all sorts of strange readings in the critical text, and so this is the thing, that these versions are not good texts. That they're not reliable. They're full of errors. They're full of marginal notes that say this verse shouldn't be in there and that shouldn't be in. It creates confusion. It's a double voice. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. If you've got a verse that says you can do this, you can do that, you can do all things through him who strengthens me, maybe it's me who strengthens me. Maybe I strengthen myself, or maybe it's my pastor who strengthens me, or maybe it's an angel, or maybe it's Moloch, or maybe whatever, No, it's Christ who strengthens, and being double minded on all these verses, it's like they drive you nuts. And that's what I say. I see people, um, and one of the things is, it's like, I think he mentions it actually. It's like, well, or I was listening the other day to someone. It might even be this guy. I can't remember. But he was saying that you can get these preachers who are really good. They're really good preachers, and they preach everything really good, but they're using a modern version. So that's proof that modern versions are good. And it's like, man, most of these guys, you look at Mark Ward. When he's put on the spot, he'll quote the King James because he grew up on it. So he's got the King James inside of him. He actually thinks that these other Bibles have those similar readings. So he's got it like a Christianity that's sort of, oh yeah, I can get the Trinity, I can get this and that. He hasn't just gone, let's just throw the King James to the wall and read a modern version and try to get these same doctrines that you can't. You can get like, 20% of the way with some of these doctrines. You might get 50% of the way with some of these doctrines, but it's like it's not all there. And so, especially when you're reading through some of these books, like it's not just the Bible isn't just a book of doctrines. When you're reading through Mark, it's got a theme to it. It's got certain themes that come and go, come and go. When you read John, it's got these themes to it. So when there's something missing there, it's building up to that and it's not there. And so you're missing the whole entire point, which, yeah, sure, it might be in Matthew, but it's like you're missing that. And sometimes it's taken out of all three of the synoptics. So anyway.
I don't buy the rationale that he's blessed the one and he has cursed the other. That doesn't work for me.
Okay, so when the Bible is saying one thing in the Greek text and then saying the exact opposite in the critical text, isn't that of concern? Or wouldn't, like, has God blessed both of them? This just doesn't make any sense to me. It's like saying there's two truths. There's one truth. There's one word of God, and everything else is an aberration of that. And so you've got to basically then argue and say why the critical text is better. Not just some people have these arguments and all the rest of it. Because, I mean, I can tell you just as many conspiracy theories that James White has. He believes Easter is a pagan festival in his book. What else does he believe? He believes just all sorts of weird things. And these are conspiracy theories. And so I can point out just as many with James White, but just because he comes across as an academic, and Gail Replinger and Peter Ruckman don't, you're jumping over to the critical text camp. Well, this is what you're saying because these things aren't compelling to you and all the rest of it. Really, you need to. What I would do if I was you, Matthew, and this is just a recommendation. I would just start going through from Matthew. I know you've nearly finished the UBS. I would start going through from Matthew. I would get the TR. I would get the UBS. I'd get Nestle Island text. I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same except for the footnotes. But I'd get the Tyndale House. I'd get all of them and line them all up together, and just start studying slowly through, and just mark where there's differences, and ask yourself in every difference, is there a theological change? And ask yourself, is that a representative of the original? When it talks about Asa, in the King James or in the TR, and it's changed to Asaph in Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, you've got a reading there that's an aberration, and you've got a reading there that's wrong. You've got a wrong genealogy there. It it disagrees with the Masoretic text. It appears 10 times clearly in the Masoretic text, and so you've got this error there. The TR doesn't have that error, and so you've got to admit to yourself, okay, the TR doesn't have that error. Which is the correct text? Now, if God was going to make a book on mathematics, you would expect it to have 1 plus 1 equals 2. You wouldn't expect to have 1 plus 1 equals 4 or 9 or whatever. But this is what the critical text has. It has Jesus going to the wrong location. It has the swine marathon. It has all sorts of strange, weird, bizarre readings, wrong readings, historical aberrations, and in the Greek it has solecisms. So it has just basic grammar in Greek. It's destroyed in the critical text, and so you've got to note those places and go, okay, that's an error there. Is the TR correct here? And if you go through every single place, you'll end up ticking yes, 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 yes to the TR, and no, 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 no to the critical text in every place. That's just what someone like I've gone through Matthew 1 so many times, and just going through it, just reading through that genealogy, reading through the firstborn son, and looking through the argumentation and looking at the manuscript evidence. It's just like the critical text it doesn't even come into play here. It's just so wrong, and so, it just creates so many errors, and so anyway, that's just something from me to you. I would just say that's what I would challenge you to do, is to study each one of these verses, just to go through, see where there's changes. And also I'd recommend a really good book. You can buy it for like $3 or something. It's by a guy called Scott Jones, and it's called I'm just going to have to look it up. I won't be a second. Whoops, my phone is nearly flat. Here we go. So this book is called The Magic of Evolutionism and Modern Bibles by Scott Jones. Thanks, Annie. And so I would recommend you get that book. And so maybe you can see the cover there. It's got Alpha and Omega symbol. But if you maybe pause that, it's on Amazon. You can just download it. And I would recommend you just read through. He's got 90 differences between Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Some of them don't end up in translations, because he's talking about basically where these disagree with each other and where they agree with each other, but sometimes both of them have such bad readings that they have to go with the TR reading. And sometimes they're just going with the Vaticanus, sometimes they're going with Sinaiticus. It's like it's a smorgasbord. They're just picking and choosing whatever they like, whatever they feel like. They're going by feelings. And so it's not a science.
So here's my plan for the foregoing future, just so you know where Matt Everhard is at on this topic right now, if you care where I'm at on this topic. First, my future plans. Number one, I'm going to finish.
So just before you say this, you were saying, if you care and all that. I just want to say, like, I know that like this video might come across as like I'm just like, oh, this Matthew guy, he's off the wall, blah blah blah. Nearly everyone that I know isn't a TR person. Nearly everyone. The only people I know who are TR people are usually people who are online, and we sort of find these groups and end up chatting and all the rest of it. And so, what do I desire for critical text people? That they would become informed, because I find that people, they are ill-informed. Many times they're making conclusions on, what would be labelled Hyper King James onlyism, Ruckmanism, Rippling material, where actually at the end of the day, it's just looking at the text. Just look at the text, look at the evidence, pray about it, think logically. And I think if you are not being influenced by critical text people, or you don't have some ulterior motive, to me, I can't see why someone wouldn't go with a TR position. And so I hope you do. I believe it's very important.
My devotions in the UBS 4. I think that's, I mean, I just have to. I'm so far into it now. It would be crazy to turn around and change my mind about anything at this point. So I'm going to finish up my translation work on this. I only have a few books to go, and I'm full steam ahead, ready to do that. Second, when I complete the UBS 4, there is a strong possibility that I'm going to switch over to the Tyndale House Greek New Testament. I love what they did. I think it was brilliant to start with the Tregellus work, and I think it was brilliant to limit the scope, for the most part, to the most ancient manuscripts, especially within the first 500 years. That's what I really care about. I don't so much care about the most recent 500 years of manuscripts. I want to know what was in the first 500 years of manuscripts. And I think that the Tyndale House does an awesome job.
So this is very similar to James White saying, I want to know what the apostles wrote and all this sort of stuff. And I know Jeff Riddle talks about the semantics of having the original text and all that sort of stuff. And I think he's done brilliantly in exposing Hickson and Gurry on that issue. But at the end of the day, to me, I can't see how preservation, how has preservation come through to today, when you have a text that's only just sort of been formulated in 1881, it's been amended in about 700 different places. Before that was just disappeared. And Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, it doesn't look like they were utilized much. I mean, you don't find a whole ton of copies, Bible translations from Sinaiticus or Vaticanus. It's like, and so the thing is, it's like this hidden sort of mystical type of knowledge, and then it's sort of rehashed in these days, and it's like, this is the word of God. This overrides what everyone has, and it's like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's like with Jehovah's Witnesses. I remember when I was first saved, talking to them, and they were sort of like, well, the original disciples and everything were really good, and then after that, it sort of fizzed out, and then no one was like a Christian for 1,500 years really, and then the Jehovah's Witnesses, came back on the scene with, was it Charles Taze Russell, and he basically revived Christianity, or Jehovah's Witnesses again, and to me it's like that. Where was this text in the Reformation? Gone. Anyone looking at it, Erasmus or Mill, or what rubbish, and it's rejected, and now it's like the best. It's like just the absolute opposite of just logic, of the preservation of God's word, and times when whole nations have turned to God and everything, and the received text has been there. I'm seeing the critical text. It was mentioned earlier about I'm seeing Matthew saying he's seeing a revival from critical text. I'm seeing confusion. In some places in the world, there's certain readings in the Bible that are in the critical text, like having, wearing things like this, which you see in a lot of cultures, and that's in the critical text, and it's in a lot of the Bibles. This is something I've had to deal with the Pakistani translation, and so these are things in the Papua New Guinean Bible. It's like, oh, they won't know what a sheep is, or a lamb. They won't even know what a lamb is. So it's like, we'll call Jesus the guinea pig of God, instead of the Lamb of God, or to the Alaskans, it's like the seal of God. It's like a white fluffy thing, and if you kill it, it's all blood all over it. It's disgusting. And these type of things. I mean, you think some of these English Bibles are bad with the Passion Translation. I mean, just go through some of these Bibles in other languages that the UBS are bringing out nowadays. I mean, I've been following the Urdu Bibles. I mean, the joint Bibles with Muslims, calling Jesus Isa. Isa is also part of calling Isaac the rejected son. You got Ishmael and Isaac. You got the rejected son Isa. This is in the Bible Society is bringing out this sort of stuff. So this is the thing I find the critical text guys are like, oh, I'm following this text. Okay, well, are you going to be critical of the Bible Society? Are you going to be critical of, like, I understand being critical of Bart Ehrman. Everyone's critical of him. What about Jan Krantz? What about being critical of Tommy Wasserman? What about Jennifer Knust? What about half of these other guys in the academy who are absolute heretics? Are you going to be critical of them too? Because if you've got the critical text and you're on their side and you're, cheering on their scholarship, the Bible says if someone comes to your door and they don't have this doctrine, don't even invite them into your house. I mean, the thing is, these guys are like, okay, I'm going to let them write my Bible, and it's like I just can't understand that. Anyway, we'll continue.
Of collating that information for us. Having said that, if there was some discussion about a new printed TR text, some of my friends online are talking about maybe publishing something like that, a new edition of the Textus Receptus, and I instantly emailed those guys and I said, please, 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 we already have that. We already have that from Trinity TBS, right? Trinitarian Bible Publishers. Is that right? Did I get the acronym right? We already have that. We already have one of those. Please, please, please do a majority text, a straight majority. Give me a text with a straight majority. I would love that. I think that'd be awesome to have. And you can include the majority of texts, every single one of them. It'd be even better if it was a majority text from the first 1,000 years or the first 500 years. I think that would be awesome. But
the thing is, there are majority texts out there. So I guess by saying this, you're saying that they are not good enough. Also, if you did bring out these majority texts, the thing is, where are the Bible versions based upon these? Where can I get an English Bible based upon the majority text? It's like, I know sometimes they pop up every now and then, but it's like usually they're left to the web version or whatever. The majority text, that's what I say to James Snap. It's like, well, so, okay, if you've got the correct text, where are all the Bibles based upon? Where's even an English Bible based upon your text? And that's why people who are like that, Byzantine priority and majority text, they usually gravitate to a TR type of text, but then just point out, there's errors in this. And as far as printing the text, by the sounds of it, all they want to do is just print a TR edition and have bigger margins and bigger spaces, so you could probably do translation work. That's all cool. That's all good. I'd probably just leave that to the Trinitarian Bible Society because they're still printing Bibles, TR Bibles into other languages, and so this would be how they make money. So I'd probably more so if see they're saying they want to do it and they don't want to make any money from it. So, well, why not just sort of petition the Trinitarian Bible Society to do that? Okay. Then they want to make one with the apparatus at the bottom. Great, but it's like, if you could, can't you just buy this one and then you've got the apparatus anyway? But they sort of want the apparatus with the TR editions, and it's sort of like, I just don't trust most of the people that I've seen with these videos and everything like that. I just don't trust that these guys have the credentials or the scholarship to be able to work out which TR reading is a variant or which TR says what. I mean, half the time, like I'm just going through Scrivener's 190 list, And I'm finding all these different readings and strange things and mistakes and errors, and that's just in Scrivener. And I think, man, hasn't anyone gone over this in the last, what is it, 150 years? Hasn't someone just gone through and just checked all these? Now, I know D.A. Waite did, I know Kurt DeVitro did, and they've just sort of summarized a bunch of stuff. But I mean, going in depth and see, sometimes to these guys, because many of these guys, their scholarship was pre-internet, where they were doing a lot of their studies, and so, and even when the internet came on board, it took a long time for a lot of stuff to be uploaded on there. And so, someone like D.A. Wade or Kurt Vitro, these guys, they're going with just printed material or books on this is what Scrivener said, but to actually have Scrivener's writings there, and you can check it, and you can go to Beza's manuscript and look up if there's a print error there or whatever. I mean, these are all issues that should be being done, and I'm finding that there's hardly anyone doing it. Everyone's just really interested in the critical text at the moment. It's like everyone being involved in evolution. To me, it's just like a clear cut, like you either believe in evolution or you believe in young Earth creationism. And that's where I see, someone saying their critical text, it's just like, I'm believing in evolution. And so I think it's foolish and all the rest of it, but I hope that you come back and come around.
Yeah, we need a new publication of the majority reading text, because as far as I know, the other ones that exist are either really expensive or no longer in print. Finally, and I'll end with this, I am open to listening to arguments on any specific given reading. I'm still going to remain open to it because I want to be a rational, logical, a person in which logical persuasion and reason avails. That's kind of who I want to be. So I'll listen to any argument on any text, and if we can go into Mark's longer ending, that is great. If you want to talk John's Gospel and some of the difficult readings there, or 1 John with me, I will hear any argument. However, at this point, I am going to use the critical text and critical text translations. That's where I've come down. You can disagree with me, and I'd love it if you did. In fact, you can comment on this YouTube video and tell me where I'm wrong. But know this, no matter what side you choose, I do love you lots, and I will chat with you later. See ya.
Okay, so I think you, and at least he was just straight up, this is what I think, this is what I believe, but I think out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so there's basically, I just see that he's seen that if you're a TR person, you'll get labeled as a King James only person, and you're probably a King James only person at heart, sort of deep down. You're arguing the same sort of things, and so you get thrown into all these conspiracy theories that I don't want anything to do with. I don't want to be known as that type of person. And the thing is, I get that thrown at me every day. And people say, "Oh, you believe this, do you? Oh, you believe? Oh, you're a King James." And I've had people just in passing, like, "Oh, Nick says that King James guy, King James only guy. Yeah, he's a hardcore King James onlyist." And half of the debates are like King James onlyist Nick Sayers debating this guy, and I'm like, and I get on there and I say, "Hey guys, look, I understand. I'm I'm pretty patient with being called whatever. You can call me a dog. You can call me a King James only. Whatever you want to call me." Um, but I've actually done another English translation, which is in the Hyper King James only type of thing. I would be booted from their group. You know what I mean? Like, if you translate show into, or shoe, SHEW, into show, you tamper with the word of God, sort of thing. And so anyway, that's my story. So anyway, thanks, Matthew, for your input there. I disagree, and I think the Tyndale House is sort of like critical text light. It's just another critical text. I mean, where was the word of God before this? This is one of the things people are hardcore with. Where was the word of God before 1611? And it's like, well, they were dealing with different technology of printing, and it took just a while to get, you know, what was on manuscripts into the printer form. And then by 1611, they'd nailed it. And it's a different technology. Just like if you were putting, the Bible onto the computer when the internet started, maybe they put on the wrong edition of the King James. Maybe it had errors in it, and then eventually they put on the right edition, and maybe that didn't happen for 10, 15, 20 years. It can take a while for a different technology to come up to speed. It took the King James, it took the TR guys a while to get it all sorted out, and then the King James just nailed it, and it's been perfect ever since. But these guys aren't going through a transition in technology or anything. They're just tinkering with. It's like the TR is already perfect, KJV is already perfect. They're tinkering with it, and it's like, oh, now we want this reading. No, we want that changed. No, we're believing a conspiracy theory that Erasmus got this wrong. No, he only used one manuscript here. He did this. He slipped on a banana peel over here, and he had this wrong reading. They were rushing to print, and he dropped all his manuscripts down the sewage pipe, and they had to pick them up, and it read something different, and it goes on and on. So anyway, bless you guys. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. And I'll try to continue my series on the 190 list of Scrivener in the next few days. I'm going to do another one. So God bless you. So where are we? No more comments. Okay, bless you guys. Thank you.